everybody. Welcome to DevOps Breakfast. I'm Gina Smith.
I'm Michael Araneta.
And we have a new name. We were DevOps Drinks.
We were DevOps Drinks, but we also realized that it's also breakfast anytime in the world at any one time. So we changed it to breakfast.
Well, that and IDC Corporate in the US didn't like the use of the word drinks. I tried to argue it, but I figured if you're drinking, eventually you get to breakfast. No.
It's also good because, I've got coffee all the time. So breakfast usually comes with 6 cups of coffee. So there you go.
Yeah, it's always mornings.
It's all fitting.
So Edwin Kwan is joining us later, Michael. He's the head of application and software security at Tyro Payments. That'll be interesting.
It's also interesting from the perspective of how this Tyro Payments company is turning itself into a bank. They just acquired a license out of Australia. So very interesting, the set of developments over there.
Yeah, and he wrote a chapter in this great book called DevSecOps Fails, where all these enterprise leaders wrote about their worst mistakes in security. And it's just a great book, and so we're really happy to have him. Let's see, in the news, Puppet released its Relay product to public beta this week. Event-driven IT automation is what everybody's talking about, certainly during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
What else, Michael? Red Hat updated the Ansible automation platform. It's all IT automation and,
Yeah, it is. And I think particularly for Red Hat, where they're just really looking at all the workflows that are being put into this Ansible automation tool and how exactly are they going to measure the ROI, but also the efficiency of automation. So that's going to be a big shift in the use of Ansible.
Yeah, they added an ROI calculator actually to the new platform.
And that's usually an indicator of how the cadence, but also the growth of the product is. When a company starts to talk about ROI, then that's also indicative of how the product has taken on quite a bit of growth momentum, but also usage.
That's an excellent point. When you start talking about ROI, you've reached a certain point of maturity, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, very interesting insight.
So Ansible matures. That's the story I think that should be looked at.
And they're all about automating the management of IT. And that's, useful right now in the times of COVID. IDC has been doing the survey, right? The COVID global survey. Let me see. 880 enterprise leaders globally are asked, how are you reacting to the COVID-19? I thought this was interesting in the most recent results. If we can bring up the graphic right here. They asked the enterprise leaders, which of these areas will likely be permanently changed as a result of the COVID pandemic?
Right.
And 68% said we've got to diversify our supply chain in the US, right? Only 42% said that in Asia.
Right.
But we're further along on the rebound scale. Right?
Yeah. So the supply chain, obviously, as people start to really look at new relationships, is going to be a big story that we should be tracking. The other point is that I think this particular survey also looked at the impact on the business model as well. Is going to see a lot of changes. Maybe it'll turn into a services model for many of these organizations, maybe a lot more entry into new customer segments. We never know, but I think that increasingly we're seeing new models that are being created.
That's right. They were the number 2 answer on that question on, what is going to be permanently changed was operating models.
Yeah.
And that seems so critical because, everybody's working at home and how are you distributing? I mean, on a totally unrelated, well, I guess it's not that unrelated. I was talking to PayPal's chief security officer, and he told me that they've doubled their revenues during the COVID crisis. Well, because everybody's at home buying stuff. So the digital companies are doing great and everyone else needs a new operating model.
That's right. But we also need to recognize that there is, according to this survey, a push to also improve the customer experience, especially as this customer experience gets transplanted over to the digital world, the digital channels that we are seeing being launched. That also is a key priority for many of the C-level executives we are interviewing, at least for this survey.
That's right. I mean, you talk about digital disruption and people always say, well, Amazon, got rid of the bookstores, or Uber, but how did they do it? They did that by improving the customer experience, not by, oh, we have an app. And so.
Yeah, and it would be also interesting to find out, well, since Edwin Kwan wrote a piece on fails, I wonder how security fails would also impact the customer experience while we're on this conversation on customer experience.
Yeah, and Tyro Payments is doing some real interesting things with customer experience. Edwin Kwan, again, he's the head of application and software security at Tyro Payments. And I think he's here.
Edwin is here.
Hello.
Edwin.
Hello, Edwin.
Hi, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, happy to be here.
I forgot to tell you that you need a drink. Do you have a drink?
I've got some tea, some peppermint tea.
Okay.
Tea counts. We have our water, and I'm sure Michael is always drinking his coffee.
That's right.
Nice.
So Edwin, I was telling Michael that the way that I was acquainted, that you and I were acquainted, was I read this great book, Epic Failures in DevSecOps, and you're one of the 8 co-authors, IT pros, talking about just disastrous security in the enterprise and how you fixed it. But your chapter was on threat modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
You have some best practices. You talk about, getting leadership buy-in and early feedback and automating more. And I guess all of those apply to what we're talking about today, which is open source security in the enterprise.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think when I wrote that book, it was really early in our journey, or that story is very early from our journey when we're trying to, I guess, uplift our security SDLC. So that was all part of the journey, and obviously now we're at this next step or this next stage where we're trying to, I guess, do more due diligence in our open source procurement process.
And I think you're looking at especially the unique challenges in the payments world, right? And I think Tyro also has a broader license in Australia. Is that correct? I mean, how is this transformation from a payments company into effectively a bank going? And what are the security implications that you're really concerned about?
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So so we started out as a payment processing company, right, doing those card payment machines. And when did we do this journey? Maybe about 5 years ago. We started that journey to get our full banking license. And as a bank, we're a merchant bank, so we're a bank for the merchants who have those card payment processing systems with us. You need to do a few things. So you need to do more than just having that card payments processing. You need to do loans. You need to do deposits, pay interest on deposits, and so forth. So we need to, I guess, develop a few more new products. And with those products, we've increased our potential attack surface area. So it's no longer just a terminal is talking to us. You can now use your mobile phone to, I guess, do your online banking. And you can use, I guess, other means to communicate with us. And because of that, there's a much larger attack surface area. And hence we started this journey.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the attack surface issue. 80% of cyber attacks are application based. Could that be true? I saw that figure early. I mean, that means that all the open source components in these applications would be super vulnerable, right? Because hackers can just look it up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It doesn't surprise me because application, I guess, attacks or breaches comes in multiple forms, right? So you have open source components, which is one of them. So you get vulnerabilities in open source that you put into your own code. There's also, I guess, the way you implement the business logic. There might be some flaws in there. There's also configuration mistakes that you can make. So there's many avenues where you could, I guess, make your application less secure. So it doesn't surprise me with that kind of stat that you have read out there.
Are companies like Tyro asking for like a full software BOM when they buy software, like a bill of materials, so they know all the open source components that went into the software that you're procuring? I mean, like second and third generation vulnerabilities, right?
We've got tools for that. So for the components that we are using, and as I guess open source for our applications, we have tools to scan that, to do some due diligence, just to make sure that we are fully aware of what we're actually putting into our systems. We've got policies in place in terms of what we can use and what we shouldn't be using. And I think that's really important because there's some research I read out there that a good percentage of an application that a company makes is actually open source. It's written by developers who are actually not part of your company. So I think that's about what 85% or more. So you got your development team that's writing only 15% of your code that you got all those controls and training and awareness for. But what about the other 85%? Those code that you have no idea who are writing those code. So
Yeah.
that's really
You don't know if
important.
there are vulnerabilities or there could even be licensing issues there that could risk your IP. I mean, it's just,
Yeah. Oh,
people think,
absolutely.
well, open source software is less secure, or people think it's more secure, but really it's neither. It's just a matter of not knowing, I guess, what
Exactly.
have in 85% of your code.
Yeah, no, and what surprises me too is if you look at most companies, when you are trying to buy a software, you do a lot of due diligence. You ask questions about the contract. You negotiate, like you do a risk assessment. Do you guys do this? Do you guys meet so and so standard? It's a whole lot of due diligence done in there. But when it comes to open source that you're trying to embed into your application, there's a stark contrast in terms of what people do. So if the software is free, I find that the diligence that's done is not as much. Whereas if you've got to pay $1, all of a sudden legal gets involved, finance get involved. They ask all those questions like, is this the right tool? Have you compared it with everything else?
Here's the
It's not the
Is
check.
same for
there
open
a
source.
best practice for just really making a determination about what open source component would be of higher quality compared to another open source quality issue?
There, there aren't any definitive, but I can share with you what I use. So the things that I use is I make sure that hey, there are no existing known vulnerabilities in there. You don't want to be introducing any known vulnerabilities into your application to begin with. So that's a red flag if there is. The next thing that I look for is I would prefer using applications that are very popular. And there are two main benefits for that. So if it's really popular, it means that there are multiple people using it and many more eyes actually scrutinizing it. So there's a higher chance if there's a defect or vulnerability that someone's going to find it. And the second thing is because it's really popular, that project or that open source project would not get, I guess, abandoned. Someone's going to be, because a lot of people are using it, so someone would actually invest their time to contribute back to the open source if there's a vulnerability to try and fix it. So those are my two things that I look for. So, there's no vulnerabilities to begin with, and it's of good quality, and quality is measured by popularity.
Is there an issue too, like if you have a really big enterprise, and I know you have more than 150 developers there, but I mean, some enterprises are even still larger, and they find and fix, say, a vulnerability in a piece of code, that piece can still be used and reused by other teams. So essentially you're putting out the same fire over and over again. I mean, do you find that to be the case, and how do you get around that?
It's all about it's all about visibility, making sure teams are aware of it and having a good policy for how you should be addressing these things. So we've got tools that are integrated into the pipeline that helps us determine these things. And we've got what we call SLOs, service level, what is the word? Objectives. So in terms of when there is a vulnerability that has been discovered, how long do you have to actually fix it? And it's based on the severity rating. It's based on how important this app is to our business. Something that's really critical, you have a much lower SLO in terms of when you should address it. Something that's not as critical, you have a longer SLO. And we've kind of built it into the system where once that SLO has expired, it's going to break your bill. So that's kind of like how we ensure that vulnerabilities actually do get addressed eventually.
What about
Are the SLO objectives shortening in terms of your capability to shorten it? I just would like to find out, are we getting better at getting a shorter SLO ultimately?
It's so I think we are. So what we're also doing too is we're looking at different things. SLOs are very important, but that's more of a reactive kind of behavior where we have found something, let's try and fix it. So that vulnerability is already out there. A lot of times when a vulnerability has been disclosed, publicly disclosed, they usually come out with a fix straight away most of the time. And from then on, everyone knows what the vulnerability is and you are exposed to, and obviously the other controls in there. So what we're trying to move towards is the whole idea of not having stale dependencies to begin with, having this good culture of always upgrading your open source dependencies to the latest version, just like how your iPhone or your mobile device would automatically update. We're trying to get that going in there where we're not dependent on someone publicly disclosing a vulnerability. We're just going to try and keep up to date. And I like to think of that as the open source tax. Open source is great. You get software that allows you to build a lot faster. There's a tax involved in it. And that tax is the maintenance tax that you got to put in there.
Yeah, I like that. The open source tax is vigilance. You have to be more vigilant. That's a good point. Is it harder now with COVID? I know Michael was just telling me about a survey he recently ran about new challenges for payments in the time of COVID-19. But I think overall, are there bigger security challenges?
With COVID, not so much in the application space because it's all built into the pipeline. It's not that we have to be on site to I guess get security going. It's in there. It's in our DNA. It's part of this process. We have this thing what we call a secure by default, where being secure is the path of least resistance in there. So that hasn't changed regardless of whether we're working remotely or in the office. So not so much for us.
But at the same time, your application build is gathering pace, primarily because you're moving to a different set of operations, especially as you turn yourself into a different bank or a different set of operations now that you're turning yourself into a bank. So yeah, any implications on that?
What I have seen is we are doing more products concurrently. We're growing. So the security team hasn't grown as quickly as the rest of the engineering team. So we're still a small team compared to where we were maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But because everything is all automated, it makes it a lot easier. We also have the concept of security champions to help us stay in touch with everybody. So there are definitely challenges with new technology, trying to understand, what works and what doesn't work. We've got all these good detective controls and reporting for some languages. And then when we start to explore new technologies and new languages, that's where we have our challenges in terms of how do we get that same level of assurance for those particular languages. But nothing that's overwhelmingly difficult for us. It's all good challenges.
This is an issue we hear about so much with DevSecOps, is enterprises having trouble getting their developers to accept the security people, right? And not think of them as somebody who's just going to drag, everything down, but save them money actually and speed things up because they don't have to redo things later.
Yeah, I think there's a value to that. So we spend a lot of our energy in terms of the awareness piece, in terms of why this is important. It's not because security says so, or not because there's a policy for that, but why are we doing this? How am I doing this benefiting me? So with the secure by default, you're allowed to go a lot faster. If you want to go off the paved track, you need to go and have more due diligence. You need to have a conversation with us, and we need to assess your application and put it through more scrutiny. So I think there's an incentive to go with the faster route. And if you're doing something new, you have to do that, but you're doing that for everyone else who's using that new technology behind you to actually benefit from it. And teams understand, we're a payment industry company. So we're reading about, all these breaches happening out there. So I think security is more in the spotlight in the last few years. So everyone's fully aware of why we're doing this. So the awareness piece is really important.
One of the key things that we have been looking at is that the underestimated task is that of changing the culture of the organization, especially around keeping security as a key priority. Has that been an easier task now, especially that you're able to prove that security by default is actually the way to go?
Yep, absolutely. It's a lot easier. It wasn't easy when we're starting on this journey because, like any changes, people saw more disadvantages, or we slowed things down before we actually sped things up. So we had a lot of people who were skeptical, but now I think people see where they're at, and they obviously don't want to drop the ball on that. We worked really hard to get to where we are. It's very easy to regress back again. So, and any security issue that you don't fix now is going to take twice the effort or even more further down the track if you actually delay it. So the cost of delay is pretty high, and everyone's fully aware of that.
Right.
Yeah, I think you made a great point where you said, the trick really is explaining to people why you should care. And you made that point in your chapter on the DevSecOps fails about, you have to convince people why they should care about threat modeling in the first place, because it's such a boring, arduous task. I mean, what is the why that you communicate here? I mean, basically, as you said in an email to me, because strangers are writing most of your software, or because attacks are, 10 a day and rising, or, I mean, what is the why?
So what I found is most people want to do the right thing. Like if you speak to any developer and you ask them, hey, are you all about writing insecure code that's vulnerable? No one's going to say, yeah, I'm doing that. Everyone wants to do the right thing. And what I find is that when we have pushback from security or from engineering or developers, it's not because they don't want to do securities. Their perception of what is good enough is different from what we believe in. So it's all about just opening their eyes up in terms of, let me just show you some of the things that we have found in the system. Let me just do a live demonstration for you. Obviously, we fixed it, but we'll show you what could have happened. And just having that awareness, having training is very specific to your system. So initially, when we started on this journey, we sent everyone on an awareness training. It's like an OWASP top 10. You learn about the top 10 issues, and we just took an off-the-shelf kind of program, and people walked away going, yeah, I don't write that stuff. It's written in this language. I don't write that. And then we kind of learned from that, and we shifted. And the next training that we did was Tyro's top 10 in Tyro's programming languages, and everyone's like, oh, we actually write that kind of stuff. So it's just that awareness in there. And once you have that awareness, I think developers take a lot of pride in the quality of the work that they do. So they would want to make sure having the knowledge in terms of the kind of vulnerabilities that are in there. And we focus a bit about defensive programming, how to write code in such a way to reduce the probability of attacks. So I think if you get those things right, good things will happen.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned OWASP. I mean, it's such an overlooked resource sometimes. And a lot of developers say, well, we're doing the dynamic analysis testing, we're doing the static analysis testing, but that doesn't get you there with the open source. So you need the tools and I guess the resources to folks like OWASP. They're doing a great job over there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the list is there for a reason. It's the top most popular vulnerabilities or that are discovered out there. So those are the most common ones in there, and you're bound to find a few of them in your application if you look really hard.
Yeah, I love that. You're helping them see the light. That's a great way to end here. Do you have anything else for him, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting challenge that you have here, especially as I suppose that you will be extending the scope of the business, right? And what are the new challenges that you foresee, especially as Tyro transforms itself as an organization?
So the new challenges is, I like to think of security as a value. So we're like a service enablement. We're there we're like, it's an overused term in security. Like we're like the guardrails. We put that framework in there so we can move really quickly. I feel like Tyro is in a good position security-wise for application in terms of being able to innovate quickly, get out to market faster if we want to test a hypothesis in terms of this is a feature or a product that a customer would like. It's not going to take us, months to actually get something out there. It's going to take us a lot quicker to do something securely and not compromise on security doing that. So I feel like we're in a good position for that in order to innovate for whatever new things we want to do in the future.
Yeah, if you have a culture of experimentation, you have to make sure it's all secure, right? So you don't blow it all, with digital disruptors coming around the corner. You have to be safe, but you need to experiment too. Interesting stuff. Edwin Kwan, Head of Application and Software Security at Tyro Payments, and you're in Sydney, joining us. Thanks so much. We hope you will come back and check us out as our show continues on. It's still early days for us.
Well, thank you, Gina. Thank you, Mike. This was my pleasure. I really enjoyed having a chat with you guys.
Well, that's all the time we have for DevOps Breakfast. Have a great day. I'm Gina Smith.
I'm Michael Araneta.
And we'll see you later.